The airplane was almost full. People were placing their bags in overhead bins, checking their phones, and preparing for a long flight. Outside the window, the runway lights shined in the evening darkness. Inside the first-class cabin, everything looked calm, but that calm was about to break. A wealthy businessman sat near the window. His expensive watch and designer suit made sure everyone noticed him. He spoke loudly on his phone about deals, money, and success. He wanted people to hear how important he was. When he finally ended the call, his eyes moved toward the woman sitting beside him. She was a black mother traveling alone with her young son. Her clothes were simple. Her face looked tired, as if life had asked too much from her recently. She gently helped her child fasten his seatbelt and whispered something to make him smile. She did not look around. She did not try to impress anyone. She just wanted a peaceful flight. The millionaire frowned. He looked at her again, confused and annoyed. In his mind, people in first class were supposed to look rich, powerful, and successful, people like him. He leaned back and laughed quietly to himself. Soon, his quiet laughter turned into comments. He spoke just loud enough for others nearby to hear. He joked about how airlines were lowering standards. A few passengers looked uncomfortable. Some avoided eye contact. Others pretended not to notice. The mother heard him, but she stayed silent. She kept her attention on her child, as if she had learned long ago that some battles were not worth fighting. The man mistook her silence for weakness. He continued talking, bragging about his businesses and luxury lifestyle. He said people worked their whole lives just to sit where he was sitting today. Then he glanced at her again and smirked. The air in the cabin slowly grew tense. A flight attendant walked by and politely asked if everything was all right. The mother nodded softly. The millionaire smiled confidently, acting as if nothing was wrong. But the mood had already changed. A few passengers exchanged looks, sensing something uncomfortable in the air. The plane doors closed. The engines began to hum softly. The flight was minutes away from takeoff. Then suddenly, the speaker above their heads made a soft sound. The captain's voice filled the cabin. At first, it sounded like a normal announcement, but something in his tone felt different, serious, careful. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, "before departure, we need to confirm the identity of one passenger on board. Cabin crew, please assist immediately." Passengers looked at each other, confused. This was not normal. The millionaire chuckled. "Probably a security issue," he whispered, shaking his head. But a flight attendant stopped near their row. Her expression was respectful, careful. She looked directly at the mother. "Ma'am," she said gently, "may I please confirm your name?" For the first time since boarding, the mother looked up. Her eyes were calm, but there was something deeper behind them, something the millionaire had not noticed before. She quietly confirmed her name. The flight attendant nodded and walked away quickly, speaking softly into her headset. Now the millionaire's smile faded just a little. Why were they asking about her? The cabin grew unusually quiet. Even the child sensed the change and held his mother's hand. Passengers began whispering. Some turned around to look at her again, this time with curiosity instead of judgment. A moment later, the captain's voice returned, more urgent than before. "Cabin crew, please prepare for immediate coordination." The mother took a slow breath. And for the first time, the millionaire felt something he was not used to feeling. Uncertainty. He had laughed at her only minutes ago. But now, something was happening, and somehow, it was connected to her. The question slowly spread through the cabin like silence before a storm. Who was this woman really? And why was the captain calling for her before the plane had even left the ground? The cabin remained quiet after the captain's announcement. The soft sound of the engines filled the space, but the usual conversations had stopped. Passengers looked around, trying to understand what was happening. Some whispered. Others simply watched. The millionaire leaned back in his seat, forcing a small laugh. He tried to act relaxed, as if the situation had nothing to do with him or the woman beside him. "Strange," he muttered. "Maybe they made a mistake." But deep inside, something felt different now. The confidence he showed earlier was slowly fading. The black mother remained calm. She gently adjusted her son's jacket and gave him a reassuring smile. Her movements were slow and controlled, as if she was used to pressure. She did not look nervous. She did not ask questions. She simply waited. A few rows behind them, someone quietly started recording on their phone. Moments like this often spread quickly online. People sensed that something unusual was about to happen. The flight attendant returned, this time with another crew member. Their attitude was noticeably different now, more respectful, more careful. They leaned slightly toward the mother and spoke in low voices so others could not hear clearly. The millionaire watched closely. This was not how flight attendants normally behaved with passengers, especially not someone he had just dismissed as unimportant. The mother nodded once, listening carefully. Her expression did not change, but her eyes showed focus. She asked one short question, and the attendant answered quickly before walking away again. Now the whispers in the cabin grew louder. "Who is she?" someone asked quietly. "I don't know," another replied. "But this looks serious." The millionaire crossed his arms. He tried to convince himself that it was nothing. Maybe a paperwork issue. Maybe a misunderstanding. Still, he could not ignore the uncomfortable feeling growing in his chest. He remembered how loudly he had laughed earlier, how easily he had judged her. For the first time, he avoided looking directly at her. The story then shifts slightly into her past. The narrator explains that this was not the first time people had underestimated her. Many times before, strangers had looked at her clothes, her tired face, or the color of her skin and decided who she was without asking. She had learned long ago that reacting with anger only gave others power. So she chose silence. Not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough not to prove herself to anyone. Her son looked up at her. "Mom, are we in trouble?" he asked softly. She smiled and shook her head. "No, baby. Everything is okay." Her voice was calm, steady, the kind of voice that made people feel safe. A few minutes passed, but the plane still did not move. Outside, airport vehicles began moving near the aircraft. Something was clearly delaying departure. Then the speaker clicked again. The captain spoke once more, and this time his voice carried urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are currently handling an unexpected situation that requires immediate assistance from a passenger on board. We appreciate your cooperation." The cabin fell silent again. The millionaire swallowed slowly. A passenger nearby whispered, "I think it's her." The realization spread row by row. People who had ignored her earlier were now looking with curiosity and respect. The energy in the cabin had completely changed. The millionaire felt heat rise to his face. Just minutes ago, he had treated her like she did not belong there. Now the entire flight seemed to be waiting for her. The flight attendant returned once more and stopped beside her seat. "Ma'am," she said gently, "the captain would like to speak with you." The mother closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if preparing herself. Then she unbuckled her seatbelt and slowly stood up. The cabin watched in complete silence. And as she stepped into the aisle, the millionaire realized something that made his stomach tighten. He did not know who she was, but he was starting to understand that he had made a very big mistake. As the mother stood in the aisle, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath. Conversations stopped completely. Even the sound of movement faded as passengers watched her walk slowly toward the front of the plane. Her son remained in his seat, holding the small toy in his hands, trusting that his mother knew exactly what she was doing. The millionaire followed her with his eyes, confusion growing inside him. Only minutes ago, he had laughed at her. Now, flight attendants were guiding her forward with respect, almost urgency. It did not make sense to him. The plane still had not moved from the gate. Outside, flashing airport lights reflected through the windows. Something serious was happening, and everyone could feel it. A few moments later, the cabin speakers clicked again. The captain's voice returned, but this time it sounded different, more direct, more urgent. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We are currently assisting with a medical emergency involving a connected flight. We have been informed that a highly qualified professional on board may be able to help us coordinate an emergency response." Passengers looked at each other immediately. The meaning became clear. The announcement was about her. A quiet wave of surprise moved through the cabin. People who had ignored her earlier now leaned forward, trying to understand. Some passengers whispered her name after hearing it from the crew. Others looked embarrassed for judging too quickly. The millionaire shook his head slightly, still trying to deny what was happening. He let out a nervous laugh. "There's no way," he muttered under his breath. "Must be someone else." But deep down, he already knew. At the front of the plane, the mother spoke calmly with the captain and crew through an open cockpit door. Her posture was confident. Her voice was steady. She listened carefully, asking clear and direct questions. The crew members nodded as she spoke, treating her like someone they trusted. Back in the cabin, tension slowly turned into curiosity. Who was she? What kind of professional could delay a flight like this? A flight attendant returned briefly to the cabin and spoke quietly to another crew member. The words were not fully heard, but one sentence spread quickly among nearby passengers. "She's the only one qualified." The millionaire felt his chest tighten. He remembered every word he had said earlier, every laugh, every look of disrespect. Now, those moments replayed in his mind, louder than before. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, suddenly wishing he had stayed silent. Near the cockpit, the mother took a deep breath as the situation was explained to her. Another aircraft in the air was dealing with a critical emergency. Communication was limited, and they needed immediate guidance from someone experienced in crisis response. She agreed to help without hesitation, not for attention, not for recognition, but because someone's life depended on it. When she stepped slightly back into view, passengers noticed something new in her expression. She was no longer just a tired mother traveling with her child. There was focus in her eyes, authority, calm strength. The same woman the millionaire had laughed at only moments before now carried the attention of the entire aircraft. The captain's voice came over the speakers once again. "We appreciate the cooperation of one of our passengers who has agreed to assist us during this situation." The cabin filled with silence, followed by quiet murmurs of respect. The millionaire stared at the empty seat beside him, feeling smaller than he ever had before. He realized he had judged her based on appearance alone, without knowing her story, her struggle, or her achievements. And now, everyone else was beginning to see what he had failed to see. A few minutes later, the mother returned briefly to check on her son before continuing to assist the crew. She smiled gently at him, reassuring him again that everything was okay. But as she walked forward once more, the question in everyone's mind grew stronger. What kind of woman could make a captain delay departure and trust her with an emergency in the sky? And when the truth finally came out, the millionaire knew one thing for sure. This flight was about to change in a way no one expected. The cabin no longer felt the same. The earlier tension had changed into quiet curiosity. Passengers who once ignored the woman were now watching the front of the plane, waiting for answers. Even the flight attendants moved with more urgency, speaking softly into their headsets as they coordinated with the cockpit. The mother stood near the front, listening carefully as the captain explained the situation again. Her face remained calm, but her focus was sharp. She asked clear questions, the kind that showed experience. The crew listened closely, trusting her judgment without hesitation. Back in his seat, the millionaire felt uncomfortable. He could not stop thinking about what had happened earlier. His laughter now echoed in his mind like a mistake he could not erase. He glanced around and noticed that other passengers were no longer looking at him with admiration. Their attention had shifted completely. The story slowly begins to reveal pieces of the woman's past. The narrator explains that her life had never been easy. Years ago, she worked long hours while raising her child alone. She studied at night while others slept. She missed celebrations, birthdays, and holidays because her work demanded sacrifice. Many times, people doubted her. Many times, doors were closed before she even had the chance to speak. But she kept moving forward, not for recognition, but for survival. For her child. For the people who depended on her skills during moments of crisis. Inside the cockpit, the captain thanked her again. His respect was clear. He explained that another aircraft was facing a serious medical emergency midair, and communication with specialists on the ground was delayed. They needed immediate guidance from someone experienced in emergency response and high-pressure decision-making. She nodded calmly and began giving instructions. Her voice was steady, confident, and precise. Every word carried purpose. The crew followed her directions step by step, relaying information through radio communication. Time felt slow as everyone waited for updates. Back in the cabin, whispers continued to spread. Is she a doctor? Maybe military? I think I've heard her name before. Passengers searched their memories, trying to connect the pieces. The woman they had barely noticed earlier was now the center of attention, yet she showed no sign of pride or excitement. She simply focused on helping. The millionaire lowered his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt ashamed. He realized how quickly he had judged her, based only on appearance, on assumptions, on his own arrogance. He had believed money defined importance. Now he was watching real importance in front of him. A flight attendant walked through the aisle, updating passengers that departure would remain delayed until the situation was stabilized. No one complained. The mood had changed completely. Instead of frustration, there was respect. Minutes later, the mother stepped back into the cabin briefly to check on her son again. He smiled at her, proud but not surprised. To him, this was normal. This was simply who his mother was. She kissed his forehead softly before returning to the front. That small moment made several passengers emotional. They realized she was balancing two worlds at once. A professional trusted in emergencies and a mother carrying quiet responsibility every day. The captain's voice returned once more over the speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, we want to thank a passenger on board for her assistance. Her experience is helping us manage a very serious situation. This time, soft applause began in different parts of the cabin. It was not loud, but it was sincere. The millionaire did not clap. He sat still, staring ahead, realizing how wrong he had been. The woman he mocked was not trying to prove anything to anyone. She never needed to. And as more details about her work slowly became clear through crew conversations, one truth settled over the entire aircraft. She was not just another passenger. She was someone whose decisions could mean the difference between life and death. And the millionaire understood something painful in that moment. Respect is not worn in expensive clothes. Sometimes it sits quietly beside you until the world finally notices. The atmosphere inside the airplane had completely changed. Earlier, the cabin was filled with quiet judgment and careless laughter. Now, it was filled with patience and respect. No one complained about the delay anymore. Everyone understood that something far more important was happening. At the front of the plane, the mother continued assisting the crew. Her voice remained calm as she listened to updates coming through the radio. Every few moments, she asked short, clear questions. The captain and flight officers followed her guidance carefully, repeating instructions to the other aircraft dealing with the emergency. Time passed slowly. Passengers watched in silence, waiting for news. Some prayed quietly. Others simply stared ahead, hoping the situation would end safely. The tension was no longer uncomfortable. It was emotional. Back in his seat, the millionaire felt smaller with every passing minute. He remembered how confident he had sounded earlier, talking about success and power. Now, none of that mattered. Money could not help in this moment. Status could not solve the problem unfolding in the sky. Only knowledge and courage could, and the woman he had mocked possessed both. He shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact with nearby passengers. A few people had clearly heard his earlier comments, and their expressions now carried silent judgment toward him. For the first time in years, he felt embarrassed in public. Near the front, the mother listened carefully as a new update came through. The emergency on the other aircraft had become more serious. The patient's condition was unstable, and time was running out. The cabin crew watched her closely, trusting her next decision. She closed her eyes briefly, thinking. Then she spoke with calm certainty, giving new instructions. Her voice never shook. She explained each step clearly, making sure nothing was misunderstood. Even through the tension, her confidence brought a sense of control to the situation. Minutes later, a message came through the radio. The condition of the patient had stabilized. A quiet breath of relief spread through the cockpit. When the captain repeated the update over the cabin speakers, a wave of soft applause filled the plane. Some passengers wiped tears from their eyes. A life had possibly been saved, and everyone knew who had helped make it happen. The mother did not celebrate. She simply nodded, thanked the crew, and stepped back, allowing them to continue their work. For her, this was never about recognition. It was about responsibility. As she walked back toward her seat, passengers moved slightly to give her space. Some smiled at her with gratitude. Others whispered quiet words of thanks. The energy around her was completely different now. Warm, respectful. The millionaire felt his heart sink as she approached. He wanted to speak. He wanted to apologize. But the words refused to come out. His earlier behavior now felt heavy, childish, and impossible to undo. She sat beside her son again, gently holding his hand. He looked at her with pride. "You helped them, right?" he asked softly. She smiled. "I just did what I could." Those simple words made the millionaire feel even worse. There was no arrogance in her voice. No need to prove anything. Just quiet strength. A few minutes later, the captain's voice returned once more. This time, his tone carried relief and something else. "Respect. Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we will be preparing for departure shortly. Before that, I would like to personally thank a passenger whose expertise helped us during a critical situation today." The cabin grew silent again. Passengers looked toward the mother, already knowing who he meant. But the captain continued speaking, and his next words made everyone sit up straighter. He began mentioning her achievements, her work, the lives she had helped save in the past. The millionaire's eyes widened. He realized this moment was about to reveal something far bigger than he had imagined. And as the captain prepared to say her full identity aloud, one thought echoed painfully in his mind. He had laughed at someone extraordinary without knowing who she truly was. The cabin became completely silent as the captain continued speaking. Even the smallest sounds seemed to disappear. Passengers leaned forward slightly, waiting to hear what he would say next. The tone in his voice was no longer only professional. It carried deep respect. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain said, "today we were fortunate to have someone on board whose experience and leadership helped us manage a critical emergency. Without her assistance, the outcome could have been very different." All eyes slowly turned toward the mother. She sat quietly beside her son, her hands folded calmly in her lap. She did not look proud or uncomfortable. She simply listened, as if this kind of attention was something she never asked for. The captain continued, "Our passenger is not only a medical specialist, but also a recognized emergency response leader who has assisted in multiple national crisis situations. She has spent years helping save lives during disasters and high-risk emergencies." A wave of surprise moved through the cabin. Some passengers exchanged shocked looks. Others whispered her name softly after hearing it clearly for the first time. A few people immediately recognized it from news reports and interviews they had seen before. The woman the millionaire had laughed at was someone many people already respected. The applause began slowly at first, then grew stronger. It filled the cabin, not as excitement, but as genuine appreciation. People were not clapping because they were told to. They were clapping because they understood what she had just done. The mother smiled politely, but kept her head slightly lowered. She gently squeezed her son's hand, reminding him that everything was okay. The millionaire felt frozen in his seat. Each word from the captain felt heavier than the last. His earlier confidence was gone completely. The expensive suit, the watch, the money, none of it mattered now. For the first time, he realized how small his behavior had been. He remembered laughing at her clothes, judging her silence, assuming she did not belong. Now the entire plane knew who she was, and he wished the moment would end so no one would remember what he had said earlier. But moments like this do not disappear easily. The captain finished his announcement with one final sentence. "On behalf of our crew and passengers, thank you for your service and for reminding us how important calm leadership can be in moments of fear." The applause returned, louder this time. Some passengers stood briefly in respect. Others nodded toward her with grateful smiles. The atmosphere felt emotional almost humbling. A few people wiped their eyes, realizing how quickly people can be misunderstood. Through all of it, the mother remained the same. Calm, quiet, grounded. She leaned toward her son and whispered something that made him smile again. To her, this was not a moment of victory. It was simply another day where someone needed help. The millionaire finally looked at her, really looked at her for the first time. Not at her clothes, not at her tired face, but at the strength she carried without showing it. He wanted to speak, to apologize, to explain that he had not meant to be cruel. But deep down, he knew the truth he had meant at the time, and that realization hurt more than embarrassment. Around them, passengers slowly returned to their seats as the excitement faded. The plane prepared for departure again. Engines began to grow louder, signaling that the flight would finally continue. But something inside the cabin had already changed. Respect had replaced judgment. Silence had replaced arrogance. And as the plane began to move toward the runway, the millionaire understood a lesson he had never learned before. Real importance does not need attention. It reveals itself when others need it most. Yet one moment still remained unfinished. Because after landing, he knew he would have to face her. Not as a millionaire, not as someone important, but simply as a man who had been wrong. The airplane finally landed safely. As the wheels touched the runway, a quiet sense of relief spread through the cabin. The long delay, the tension, and the emotional weight of the journey slowly began to settle. Passengers looked calmer now, but something about this flight felt different from any other. People had witnessed more than an emergency. They had witnessed a lesson. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings. Some glanced toward the mother, offering small smiles of respect. A few quietly thanked her as they passed by. She responded the same way each time, with a gentle nod, never seeking attention, never acting important. Her son held her hand proudly, unaware of how deeply the moment had affected everyone around them. The millionaire remained seated longer than everyone else. His mind replayed everything that had happened since boarding. The laughter, the comments, the assumptions. Each memory now felt heavier than before. He realized that the problem was not just what he said, it was how easily he believed he was better than someone else. For years, money had protected him from self-reflection. People usually agreed with him or stayed silent. No one challenged him. But today, without anyone raising their voice, he had been forced to see himself clearly, and he did not like what he saw. Passengers slowly exited the plane. The cabin grew quieter. The mother waited patiently for the crowd to move before standing up with her son. She lifted her bag calmly, ready to leave like any other traveler. That was when the millionaire finally stood up. For a moment, he hesitated. Pride told him to stay silent and walk away. But something stronger pushed him forward, the understanding that silence would only make the mistake worse. He stepped closer, his voice lower than before. "Mom, I owe you an apology." She turned toward him, her expression calm, not angry. She simply waited for him to continue. "I judged you," he admitted. "I spoke without knowing anything about you. I was wrong." The words came slowly, but they were honest. For the first time, he was not trying to impress anyone. He was simply trying to make things right. The mother looked at him for a few seconds. There was no anger in her eyes, only quiet understanding. Then she spoke gently. "People often see what they expect to see," she said. "The important thing is learning when you realize you were wrong." Her response surprised him. There was no lecture, no humiliation, just a simple truth. She adjusted her son's backpack and prepared to leave. Before walking away, she added one more sentence. "Respect should come before knowing someone's story, not after." Those words stayed with him as she walked down the aisle and disappeared through the aircraft door. The millionaire stood there for a moment, watching her leave. He understood that this moment would stay with him long after the flight ended. Money could buy comfort, but it could not buy character. That had to be learned. Outside the plane, passengers continued their journeys, but many carried the memory of what they had witnessed. A quiet woman who never defended herself had earned respect not through words, but through actions. The narrator closes the story with a final message. Sometimes the loudest people in the room know the least. And sometimes the quietest person carries a story powerful enough to change everyone around them. The mother walked through the airport holding her child's hand, disappearing into the crowd like any ordinary traveler. But for those who were on that flight, she would never be ordinary again. Because that day, one moment of judgment turned into a lesson about humility, dignity, and the power of quiet strength.